What's up, guys? Welcome back to Sunday Sports Club Podcast, a podcast all about sports told by a woman. That's me, Allison Cooch. I do, in fact, have tits. I am pregnant. I am a woman, okay? Why do I know anything about sports? If you're a girl, you're like, please teach me. I have no idea what's going on. I'm tired of watching the TV. Why is my boyfriend yelling at the TV? This is like, what's it called? A Canon effect. And if you're a guy, you're like, what are your credentials? Like, you've never played football. And you're right. I have never played football. Although I never really had the interest in playing football. I was more like a no contact kind of girl. But the reason I know anything about football is because my husband, Isaac Rochelle, number 96 for the Las Vegas Raiders. He has been in the league for going on 7 years. And before that, he played college football, obviously, because you have to have something to lead to the NFL. You don't just decide one day, oh, I'm going to go to the NFL. So my husband has been playing football for basically our entire relationship. And we've been together 10 years. So I've learned a thing or two. Okay, our NFL journey has not been rainbows and sunshine and money bag. Like, this is so much fun. No, there's been ups, there's been downs. It has been a whirlwind. I've cried a lot. Like, there has been a lot to it. And the benefit of all the downs in his NFL journey have been that we have learned so much about the NFL, about the rules, about the CBA, like everything pertaining to the NFL. So when I look at the NFL, I think it is such a juicy, like, oh my God, the tea kind of sport. I look at basketball and baseball. I think those are kind of boring because I don't know anything about like the ins and outs of the family dynamic, the player dynamic, like the relationships from coaches and players. But now that I know all of this about the NFL, I'm like, there is something going on behind every league and I want to know all of it. So there is so much to football, and that's the reason I started social media and I started this podcast, because I want to show you guys everything that's going on behind, well, not everything, but I want to show you as much as I possibly can without getting in trouble about the NFL and the ins and outs, because I think if you guys know more about the NFL, it'll be more interesting for some of you as well. So I mentioned tea, I mentioned drama, and that's where we're going to start off this podcast. Is we are going to talk about something that is happening currently in the NFL. And this is like that snippet of information that you could go to your boyfriend, your husband, or anybody that's a know-it-all about football and be like, oh, hey, this is happening. Like, can we turn on this game? And they're going to look at you and be like, where the fuck did this girl learn this? So this is that snippet of information. Currently, the Chicago Bears are 0-2. Okay, 0-2, that means they are so far off to a losing season, and that's not good, okay? You don't have to know much about football to know that that's not good. Unfortunately, they weren't that good last year. They're probably not going to make it to the playoffs this year, and there's a lot of drama happening because Justin Fields, who is the quarterback for the Chicago Bears, has came out and publicly said that he is blaming him not playing so well on the coaching staff. Why is that an issue? So they have a new GM, which is their general manager, and he's in charge of like hiring and cutting and all of that. So you have a new GM, you have a newer head coach, and you have the face of your franchise, which is usually the quarterback, going off and saying things like, oh, like I'm not playing that good because of the coaching staff. Justin Fields has taken 10 sacks over the past 2 games. That is not good. A sack is when a defensive end, such as my husband, comes up and tackles a quarterback while he's going to throw the ball. And the reason that this is all not good is because clearly he's not vibing with the schemes he's been giving, the plays he's been giving, and he's not allowing to have some of these plays develop. And it just does not look that good that he is now blaming the coaching. It just overall is just a lot of drama with the Chicago Bears. I mean, this man has gotten sacked 10 times in the last 2 games. That can't be coaching. That can't all be coaching. It has to be a little bit of a self-inflicted wound. If you look at other quarterbacks in the NFL, how is Justin Fields comparing to them? And this is an issue because Justin Fields has been in the NFL for 3 years. He's coming up on negotiating a contract. And if he wants to stay with the Bears, it's just not looking good. Him blaming his bad plays and him getting sacked 10 times on the coaching staff. There has to be more to the story. So it just is a big ball of drama. And more so on that, his QBR is worse than other quarterbacks in the NFL. And it just goes to show that there is a lot more going on than just him having issues with the coaching staff. So that's where I'll leave that at that. The Chicago Bears are actually about to play the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, while you guys are listening to this, that will have been yesterday. And as we all know, the Kansas City Chiefs are a great organization, a great team. They've been solid the past few years. So are the Bears going to lose to the Chiefs? I'm going to say yes, right? Like, I'm obviously going to say, yeah, the Chicago Bears are probably going to lose to the Chiefs. And we can move on to the Chiefs because they just had something pretty big happen this past week with Mahomes. He just restructured his contract. So Mahomes, 3 years ago, when he had this huge groundbreaking contract, he was the highest paid player in the NFL and signed a 10-year contract. But he has now restructured his contract 3 years in because you have people like Joe Burrow getting big contracts, Lamar Jackson. And is Mahomes the best quarterback in the NFL? Some would definitely say so. The issue with him restructuring this contract is that he has a huge salary and a majority of it is guaranteed. I'm going to have my assistant fact check that. How much of his contract is guaranteed? My assistant didn't find it fast enough, so I had to look up an article. The Kansas City Chiefs have agreed on terms a restructured contract that pays Mahomes $210.6 million between 2023 and 2026, the most in history over a 4-year span. So his agreement could reach $218 million with escalators as well. So you got to look at, that's a fuck ton of money. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I'll mention it again. You have what they call a salary cap for every NFL team. A salary cap is an amount of money that each team each year can spend on their players. And you have to divide that out over 53 guys, right? Because that's how many are on a active roster. Him having such a huge contract definitely takes away from being able to play other big name players. So another big name player, we all know him, we all love him, we all hope he ends up with Taylor Swift. It's Travis Kelce, okay? Travis Kelce is a great player, right? Do you have enough money to pay Mahomes and Kelce and then pay 51 other guys? It's a great question. And it's actually comparable to the 49ers. 49ers right now are undefeated and they are having a great season. They've been a strong team over the past few years, but this year they're off to a great start. And their quarterback was a 7th round draft pick last year. And my husband was also a 7th round draft pick. So I know that they are not making this significant amount of money. So what happens when you have a great quarterback that's not eating up a bunch of your cap space? You're then able to pay other guys, receivers, tight ends, defensive ends, your O-line. You're able to protect this quarterback who is making not that much money. And it's super interesting because how are the 49ers going to develop over the next few years? Because once Brock Purdy is up on his contract, like, do you pay him? But for the time being, they have a lot of money to put elsewhere and to build a really strong team behind a quarterback who is also strong, but who isn't making a ton of money. Speaking of somebody who doesn't make a lot of money, let's talk about my husband. No, I'm kidding. But moving on to another current event that you guys have probably seen on social media. I just made it public. And when I say I just made it public, I'm not like this news outlet. It's not like, holy shit, breaking news, like Isaac Rochelle. No, but it is news for obviously me and my husband, our family, and for some of you guys, because you guys feel like you can see an inside to the NFL through our eyes and our social media. So as many of you know, or as some of you might not know, my husband was signed to the 53-man roster for the Las Vegas Raiders. And it feels so good to say that. And this is where I can get into a little bit more of like my personal experience and talk really about how I'm feeling and how this impacts me and my husband. My husband was a free agent the entire offseason. And that's just not great. When heading into year 7, it just, if it's becoming slower and you're not signing like, $2 million for a year, you're signing minimum contracts, it can just get sketchier and sketchier. And for this offseason, we were thinking, okay, like he's not going to get signed right away. And then the months start to pass by. He gets a few workouts. Okay, that's great. It's like a light, and then the light keeps going out because nothing really happens after him getting these workouts. So my husband didn't get a call from the Raiders until the day before NFL training camp. And leading into NFL training camp, he knew he had to prove himself. Like, he is not just going to jump in there and have an active roster spot. He really has to fight for that. And another issue is that he is or has been in the NFL for 6 years going on 7. So he is looked at as an older guy. If you're not making a huge difference, you're getting paid more than like a rookie would get paid. So it's like he really has to show his value during NFL training camp, or else why not take a chance on a younger guy who you don't have to pay as much and who could evolve into a player that you would want him to be, right? The unfortunate part is that my husband was doing so good at the beginning of camp, okay? We all saw his first game out there. Every play he was out there, he was doing great, or at least in my eyes. I'm like, yeah, he was doing great. Every play was like 100%. No, but he had some great plays. I mean, his first play of the preseason was a sack, okay? So when you look at that, you're like, okay, he's a great player. The Raiders aren't like sure who is absolutely going to be on their active roster, and Isaac is then fighting for a spot. The unfortunate thing is the Raiders during training camp then went out to LA to practice against the Rams. And while they were out there, my husband was slightly injured. And when I say slightly, it wasn't like an injury where he had to have surgery or he was thinking about surgery. It was like a strain. Actually, what happened to you? He pulled his groin, okay? Isaac, that sounds like a very simple injury. Why couldn't you just play through it? No, so he ended up pulling his groin right before the game against the Rams. And the issue with that is that he wasn't able to play in the next 2 preseason games. You can look great in practice and be a horrible player during a game. Is that my husband? I would like to say no, but the issue is that if they're evaluating Isaac to be on the 53-man roster and he goes out there and gets injured, how are they supposed to put all their eggs in one basket and be like, okay, yeah, we're all in on Isaac Rochelle. He's going to be on the 53-man roster. Like, this is what we're going to do. If you look at it from the outside perspective and you have no biases and you're not married to him or been together with him for 10 years and share a bank account, you might think, okay, yeah, like this dude only played 1 game. Sure, it was a great game. And yeah, he's been in the NFL for 6 years going on 7, but do we want to take this chance? Like, do we have enough information about this guy to make the decision to put him on the 53-man roster and to cut somebody else? Because unfortunately, that's how it is. If my husband gets a job, somebody else has to lose their job. He was put on practice squad. A lot of people would be very interested to hear this. This was not a surprise. And when I say that, obviously you're hoping that you make the 53-man roster. You're hoping he's going to be on the active roster, or you're hoping he might get a call from a different team. But when he continued on the 2023 season on practice squad, it wasn't a huge surprise for me and my husband. Whereas in last year, when my husband was cut and put on the practice squad, it was a little bit more of a surprise last year. But because of his injury, we knew that he just hadn't been evaluated as much as some of the other players might have been evaluated. What they did do is they did put him on the practice squad, and fortunately enough, he was given 2 opportunities, meaning he was able to play in the first 2 regular season games, and those were his opportunities to prove the player that he is and the player that should be on the 53-man roster. And that's exactly what happened. So my husband was on practice squad the first 2 weeks out of the preseason, or I'm out of breath. My husband was on the practice squad for the first 2 games of the season, but played on practice squad in the game. So he was able to be elevated 3 times while on practice squad, and he was elevated for 2 games. And leading into this week, we were all like, okay, is he going to be elevated again, or is he going to be activated onto the roster? And my husband ended up coming home one day and was like, hey, great news. I'm now on the 53-man roster. We cheered. We were happy. I was like, fuck yeah, I'm going to Gucci. No, that's not how it happens. But it just is another opportunity for my husband now to prove himself. And that's just what the NFL is if you're a player like my husband, you're on a minimum contract, you're going into your 7th year in the NFL, you have to prove yourself every single game, because the reality is that you can get cut at any point. your job is never safe. Now, if you look at Travis Kelce, he could have like a string of bad games and he is not going to get cut because one, he has a lot of guarantees and is on a huge contract, but two, he has also gone ahead to prove himself and the player that he is, whereas my husband might not have had as many opportunities to do that. How does this impact us moving forward? Is my husband is now on the 53-man roster. Tonight, while I'm recording this, because I'm recording it on Sunday afternoon, but my husband is about to play in Sunday Night Football tonight, and we are just looking forward to having a little bit more of a stable situation. And even though it's not as stable as some might think so, because he could still get cut at any point, to us, it is a little bit more stable because at least he is on the 53-man roster. We know that he is going to be getting these paychecks until told otherwise or until he's cut again. All right. So as long as he's taking these opportunities and making the most of it, we're in a good space. And I'm so fucking happy that we're in this good space because I'm 7 months pregnant, and being on practice squad, you know that at any point he could go to any other NFL team. And some might think that that's rare to get picked up while on practice squad to go to another team, but it's very common. And in fact, my husband was on practice squad last year with the Cleveland Browns when he got picked up to come to the Raiders for the last few weeks of the season. While it's stable, or some would say unstable, it is such a breath of fresh air and such a sigh of relief because at least my husband and I can now move forward knowing that he is in a little bit more of a stable situation. I am going to be giving birth in December no matter what. So as long as he's making the most of these opportunities, we're in a good space. If he were to be cut and put on practice squad again, like he did last year, it becomes sketchier because are you going to move? Is Allie able to move? I can't even travel after in 4 weeks. I can't travel anymore. We are just taking this as a good thing and we're moving forward. And I'm so thankful to have this community behind us and everyone cheering and everyone congratulating us. It feels so good. And it's also so fun to show the bad parts and then show the good parts. And it's almost like you guys are able to cheer us on through both. It's just such a great community that we have here. And I'm so thankful for it. Something I haven't touched on is that because my husband was put on the active roster, somebody therefore had to lose their job. And it just so happened that it was 1-1. Last year, my husband was cut in order for their team to sign a quarterback. But this year, a defensive end was cut in order to sign another defensive end. And we're going to move on to defense, which is my favorite in the NFL. You only have two. You have offense, you have defense. But my husband is on defense. And last week I talked a little bit about offense for position of the week. So position of the week this week, we are talking strictly about defense and just defense in general. And then next week we can dive into more of a specialized player so that you guys can watch football and be like, oh, I know what that player does, or I know what his job is. So in general, defense is broken up just like offense is. So offense, you have your offensive line. Defense, you have your defensive line. On your defensive line, you have a nose guard, a defensive tackle, and a defensive end. Outside of your defensive line, you have linebackers, you have corners, and you have safeties. It's funny because if you're watching the YouTube, I literally just looked at my husband just so he could confirm. I only know majority about the defensive line because that's what my husband is on. He is a defensive end, which kind of describes his position because he is a defensive tackle, but he is positioned on the end. When I talked about offense, you guys know that the quarterback is the person making the play calls. He's the one kind of running the show on offense. For defense, that is what you call the middle linebacker. So the middle linebacker on his helmet has a green dot. This is interesting and something you could talk to your boyfriend or your husband about. The middle linebacker has a green dot on his helmet, and that means that he is mic'd up, meaning he can talk to people in the box about what plays they're calling. Something I didn't know until my husband was in the NFL for a few years is I did not know that defense had play calls just like offense has play calls. In my head, I was like, oh, aren't they just all chasing after the guy with the ball? But if you are calling your defense how I'm thinking defense works, you're probably going to lose a lot of games because everyone's just running across the field and running after one person. So your defensive line are trying to go after the quarterback. They're trying to go after the ball. They're essentially trying to stop the run and get to the quarterback. And then you have your linebackers. Your linebackers aren't going to have as many NFL sacks as the defensive line because they're also in coverage and they're worried about both the run play and the pass play. And then you have your corners and your safeties who are, as I like to call it, in the outfield, which is definitely a baseball term, so don't listen to me on that. But they're going down the field and they are worried about covering your wide receivers and your tight ends. That is where I'm going to leave you guys on the defense, because defense for me, I view it as a little bit more messy, a little bit more complicated, because in reality, each player has another player that they have to cover, but you also have the defensive line that's all just trying to stampede the quarterback and trying to get to the quarterback as fast as possible. One thing I did want to mention while we are on, now that we have gotten out of the way defense and offense, are downs. What is a down in the NFL? This is the preface of why this game is so fun and so interesting to watch, is because an NFL down, you have 10 yards to. So what is a down in the game of football? A down is what gives the game structure. It is what makes the game interesting. It is literally the entire reason that this sport exists. You get 4 downs to go 10 yards. To keep it simple, we can replace the word downs with tries. So you basically get 4 tries to go 10 yards. And on your 4th try or your 4th down, you would either punt the ball, or you would be so close to getting to that 10 yard that it would make sense for you to just go for it. So let me explain it this way. If they say it's 1st and 10, that means it is 1st down and you have 10 yards to go. If it is second and 5, it is 2nd down and you have 5 yards to go. 3rd down, if it's 3rd and 1, that means you have tried 3 times and you have gotten 9 yards and you have 1 more yard to go. Now, it definitely can get complicated, because if you get sacked on a play, that means that you have added yards to how many yards you have to go to get a 1st down again. If you are at 1st and 10, so you're on your 1st down and you have 10 yards to go and you go 20 yards, it would then be 1st and 10 again. It doesn't, like, you don't get negative yards where it's like, oh, it's 1st and -10. That's never a thing. Now, it does happen where if you get so close to getting a touchdown, it could be 1st and goal, meaning that the goal line and getting a touchdown would be within 10 yards of you making those plays. If I'm not making any sense, it's probably because it would be better understood with a diagram. I highly recommend going and looking up Downs for Dummies NFL, Downs for Dummies football, like looking up something like that, because it could really help to have a visual, because it really just, it's hard to describe with just words. But essentially, you get 4 downs, aka 4 tries to go 10 yards. And that is what the game of football is all about. Hopefully I didn't just kill your buzz. Hopefully that didn't hurt your head. And hopefully you're still listening to this, because the down thing can be complicated. But we're going to move on to something a little bit more interesting and something that has been a little bit more prevalent in me and my husband's life. And that is, what does the NFL pay for in terms of moving, in terms of apartment and housing? It is going to be a little bit more surprising than you guys might think. The NFL doesn't pay for anything. It would be a team paying for a player to move, or moving expenses, or a house, or yada, yada, yada. To bring in me and my husband's personal experience, my husband has been signed on new contracts every single year. And when you're signed on a new contract, they are not responsible for anything pertaining to moving. So my husband got signed to a $2 million 1 year with the Indianapolis Colts, and they didn't pay for any moving expenses. They don't pay for an apartment. They don't pay for anything in terms of like outside the regular scope, which would be, oh, he gets a hotel for OTAs. Oh, he travels with the team, so like they pay for that. Oh, like if he's at an away game, they get a certain amount of per diem, that kind of stuff. So when my husband signed with the Colts, my husband and I did end up buying a house there. The Colts had nothing to do with that. We got a moving service. We got pods. They had nothing to do with that. And getting our cars out there, they had nothing to do with that. Moving can be so fucking expensive, but it's important to do. Like, you have to move your life to these cities, because what are you going to do? Your other options are, okay, me and my husband are going to do long distance, or what my husband and I are doing currently with this year. My husband and I are living in a furnished house. All of our stuff, all of our clothes are in a different state, and it just complicates things a ton. Not to mention the fact that we're literally about to have a baby and we literally have nothing, but that's a different story. When you get signed to a new contract, they do not cover anything. Now, I'm sure if you negotiated a contract, you could negotiate some sort of moving allowance, but I just feel like when you're negotiating a contract, you're more worried about like escalators and oh, if I get this many sacks, I feel like I deserve this much more money and yada, yada, yada. You're not really worried about moving, because moving is just like, it's just something you do in the NFL. So do NFL teams ever pay for a player to move? Because my husband has never been paid for his moving expenses. Our cars, we are responsible for that stuff. The only time a team will pay for a player to move is if he gets traded. Not picked up mid-season, traded. Physically traded. If a player is traded, immediately he is off to the other team, and usually your agent or somebody like an assistant is facilitating that move, because trades can be super complicated and they are a very like spur of the moment decision. Sometimes players don't even know they're being traded. I actually have a friend who heard that her husband was getting traded on Twitter, and that was how the news broke. So it's a very quick, fast-paced thing that happens, and players aren't able to be responsible for moving from point A to point B. And so if a player is traded, the team will give them some sort of allowance or will cover their moving expenses. Now, let's not confuse getting traded with being picked up. For example, my husband was on the Cleveland Browns practice squad last season, got a call from his agent that he was getting picked up by the Las Vegas Raiders, and my husband had a flight out an hour later, and the guy calls. My husband was like, hey, hopefully the flight gets delayed. My husband's like, wait, what? We're rushing to the airport. We're thinking he might miss his flight. And we had just gotten the call that he was going to the Raiders an hour ago. In that instance, we didn't get any moving expenses. We didn't get any help. My husband obviously got a flight out to Vegas, but that was that. And I will say the Raiders did give him a hotel for the remaining part of the season, because I think it was only like 3 weeks or something, which was super generous. And a lot of NFL teams might not even do that. They would just kind of expect the player to pay out of pocket for his living quarters until the end of the season. So no, he did not get any moving allowance. And I mean, we wouldn't have moved anyways, because it was the end of the season. We have 2 dogs. It's super complicated to move across the country. When you have 2 dogs, you have your wife, you have an apartment full of furniture. It just doesn't make sense. So that is the instance in where it has happened in our life, but the NFL, again, did not pay for that. The conversation then comes up, okay, well, it doesn't make sense to move if your husband is fighting for a job. Like, did it make sense for us to move to Vegas? No, which is why we got a furnished place. Does it make sense to move across the country? Are all of your belongings staying in one place? And this is why it's many guys in the NFL have what they call an off-season home, because in the instance of my husband, he's on minimum contract deals. It's not safe for us to move across the country with all of our belongings, all of our stuff, and fully commit to moving to a certain location, because if my husband were to lose his job and go to a different place, it's just a lot more complicated. Like him being this year with the Las Vegas Raiders. Like, yeah, now he's on the 53-man roster, but while he was on practice squad, he could have gone to any team at any point and had an hour's notice. So then it's like, okay, well, what do I have to pack up in this house? Like, what are we bringing? And it just becomes like more and more complicated if you move all of your stuff, which is why I'm so happy that we do have an off-season home. And it hasn't always been this way. We got an off-season home relatively like recently. In the last 2 years we got one, and it kind of correlated with the timing that my husband started to have a little bit more of a more unsteady career. Unsteady sounds so harsh, but you get it. So that is kind of all I wanted to talk about for this episode of Sunday Sports Club. I hope it was interesting for you guys. I hope you guys are able to take away a little snippet of information and go to somebody that thinks they're a know-it-all and educate them. Those are probably my favorite comments I can receive from you guys, is you letting me know, oh, I told my boyfriend this and he didn't believe me and he went and looked it up and like I felt so good when he was wrong. I absolutely love that. If you guys are curious about any part of the NFL or about certain plays or yada, 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 head over to the Sunday Sports Club podcast Instagram and send me a DM and let me know what topics you guys are fiending to know about, what you're interested in. I feel like things off the top of my head that I'm like, oh, these people probably don't know that much about are like traveling to away games. Like, what does that look like? Do I get to go with my husband to an away game? Do I get to sleep with him? Like, what does the NFL schedule look like? I think all of those things could be really interesting, but I want to hear from you. So head over and send me a DM. Let me know what you guys want to hear. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed and I look forward to seeing you next Monday.